Today is Monday, July 28, 2025. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. A gun-wielding hero stops a brutal knife attack in Michigan. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating. You can always email us as well. We would love to hear from you. Quick Start Podcast at cbn.org, even if it's just to tell us where you are listening in from. We'd love to get connected with you in that way. And joining me today to get through all the news of the day, as we do each and every weekday bright and early, CBN's Billy Hallowell. Billy, a lot to get to. On the focus story, you're looking at singer Ben Fuller, who has an incredible testimony.
Yeah, he overcame drugs and substances, and he's climbing up the charts. We'll get into his story today.
All right, looking forward to the details on that. On the main thing, Florida is paying for illegal immigrants to self-deport on commercial flights. Madison Seals has more details on that story coming up on the main thing. All right, make sure you are checking out all of the latest CBN News podcasts. You can find the links to them right there in the description of this podcast episode. Whole bunch of good podcasts to choose from there. Make sure you're following each and every one of them. We greatly appreciate that. And with that, we are going to head to the news in 90 seconds. And a horrifying stabbing spree inside a Michigan Walmart ended with a dramatic citizen takedown. And the armed Marine vet who helped stop it's being called a hero. 11 people ages 29 to 85 were stabbed at random inside the Traverse City Walmart over the weekend. 6 were critically injured, but thankfully all are expected to survive. Derek Perry, a former Marine and Walmart shopper at the time, confronted the knife-wielding suspect in the parking lot, shouting for him to drop the weapon while holding a small handgun. Cell phone footage shows Perry and several other brave bystanders surrounding the suspect until authorities arrived. His daughter called it a proud daughter moment, while many online said he deserves the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And a powerful move of God swept through a Mississippi prison as over 100 inmates gave their lives to Jesus and more than 50 were baptized. The event took place at East Mississippi Correctional Facility, where former gang member turned evangelist Johnny Chang shared how Jesus saved him in solitary confinement. His story deeply resonated with the inmates. The event was organized by God Behind Bars, a ministry working to transform inmates through faith and healing. Those are just some of today's top headlines. Check out more great stories over at cbnnews.com. And man, we're just getting so used to Billy seeing these tragic incidents unfold now. And it's kind of crazy. You almost have to have a plan in mind, because you never know when you are going to be at the random attack at some shopping center or somewhere else. And thankfully, this former Marine, Derek Perry, who, if you've seen the video, it's definitely harrowing. This guy's had been on an attack. There are wounded people just outside the Walmart, and they bravely confronted this guy, because who knows what could have happened further if they hadn't done that.
Yeah, it is crazy, and it even affects, our kids. I think about my 9-year-old. She's asked about these events, when she hears about them, or somebody, at school or at camp talks about it. It's scary. It's scary for kids. It's scary for adults. And you're right. You almost have to have a plan in the back of your mind. When there started being movie theater shootings years ago, it was the same thing. I started thinking, you go to a movie, you want to have fun. And I'm thinking, well, where's the exit?
Where's the exit? Right.
It's like these are things I never would have thought about before, but it feels like, an event like this too, with a knife. I mean, it's so horrific. And yeah, it just makes you think differently about every event you go to and everything you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, prayers for everyone involved there. They make a full recovery. As I said, thankfully, as of now, nobody has died from that attack, and obviously could have been even worse. So prayers for speedy recoveries there. All right, singer Ben Fuller is rising up the Christian charts, but his life wasn't always going so great. So tell me about the story here.
Yeah, this, I have to be honest, we've interviewed a lot of people in music and Christian music, and entertainment's great and fine, but when they have a personal story like this, that's what I really care about getting a chance to tell. And Ben Fuller, like you said, he's rising up the charts. He's from Vermont, but this is a guy who is finding success in his late 30s. He was a drug user for a long time. He looked for pleasure in all the wrong places, and he ended up finding himself very, very unfulfilled. When we were talking, he said, he went from seeing Jesus as a swear to Jesus as a savior, and it made me laugh. I thought, well, what a great way to recap where he sort of come from. But this is a guy who's openly preaching the gospel, sharing his music. He's only been a Christian for a few years. I want to say 6 years or so. And here he is, topping the Christian charts at this point. He talked a lot about, the changes that he's gone through. He said, I'm a whole lot more patient. I'm a whole lot more content. He says the Bible says troubles will come, and it's hard following Jesus. And he's got this new album out, Walk Through Fire, which deals with these real life issues. And just to kind of give some context on how big he has become so quickly, that he has a song with Carrie Underwood. The two of them have a song together. And so this guy's just, blowing up, but he's on this journey of following the Lord. And he said, once I learned and heard about the gospel of Jesus and how he hung on a cross and died and rose again for me to have life, and I just started believing in him and saying, Jesus, I love you. Jesus, I believe you. I trust you. Take my life. I want to be with you wherever I go. He's been blowing my mind. And so just really, really cool to have somebody be so open to about the struggles and the issues that they've been through.
And so what led him to make a change in his life from everything that had been going on before?
Yeah, so this is a guy who, he said, for 14 and a half years, he was doing cocaine, alcohol, sleeping around. He said all of these vices were attempts to try to fill these voids that he had in his life, but that nothing ever worked, right? He was not a famous singer. He always loved music, but he was not a famous singer when he was going through all this. So for 14 and a half years, he's struggling with all of this. And he said he came to a breaking point, and he just finally concluded, he's like, okay, I've tried everything, but I haven't tried Jesus. So maybe I need to ask him. And he said it was that decision that changed his entire life, and led him on to this mission that he's on now. And like I said, it's only been a few years. He talked about just seeing spiritual freedom, not only in his life, but all over the country. He's like, I'm seeing freedom all over the country because people are like, hey, I had a gun in my mouth too. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow, thanks for saying that. And what he's referring to there is he struggled with suicide too, in addition to all these other things. And when he's like, by opening up and talking about these things, other people are like, yeah, I struggle with the same thing. And so he's like, that's when you get the darkness out into the open, the light obliterates it when you start talking about these things so openly.
He spends a lot of time performing in prisons now. Why is that?
Yeah, this was really interesting to me because I saw that he, before I talked with him, that he had been performing in prisons. And he said, he never got busted after almost 15 years of addiction and doing all the things he was doing. And he said that now that he reflects on that, it gives him this passion to minister in jails and prisons, because he's like, people are serving there for their poor choices. And he said he could have done the same thing. He was making the same poor choices, right? He just didn't get caught. And so he's wanted to share his faith in prisons. And so he's gone and he's done that. And what's so interesting about that is, he said after they leave the prisons, they will hear from the people who leave those prisons that they've had, a better situation with the inmates, that lives have changed, that there's less chaos and violence after his visits. So it's become a real passion point for him with his music to show up, tell his story, because he's like, these people are no different than I was. They just got caught.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And, we were just talking about in the news in 90, talking about that movement of God that happened in prison. And, we're called to minister to people who are behind bars, who are in prison. It's definitely one of the groups that are probably most easily forgotten. And yeah, when you have someone like Ben, who, because of his life choices, could have very easily been in the same spot. And it's not like these people are that much different. A lot of them come from troubled backgrounds, but they made poor choices, but they're still people, and we can't just toss them away and forget about them. So Really great that he's doing that. And I think I would imagine his testimony probably carries a lot of weight in prison when he kind of acknowledges that, hey, I didn't go to prison, but I should have easily gone to prison. And so I'm sure it resonates with them that they are kind of on the same level. And so they're not being looked down on or anything like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that is a lot of people want to hide the negative things from their past. They don't want to address them or deal with them. And I love the fact that here's a guy who's out there addressing and dealing with the things that have happened in his life and being open about it. And I agree. That's how you obliterate the darkness, by just telling the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. So absolutely good story there. Appreciate you bringing that one to the podcast today, Billy. And we're going to go to the main thing now. And in the first state-funded program of its kind, Florida is paying for illegal immigrants to self-deport on commercial flights. Anna Giaratelli broke the story with the Washington Examiner and joins Madison Seals to discuss how Florida is partnering with federal immigration efforts. That's today's main thing.
Anna, you recently reported in the Washington Examiner that the state of Florida and Border Patrol have launched the first ever state-funded deportation program in the country. And you were actually on the ground witnessing this in action. Can you talk about what the program looks like?
Yeah, this is, like you said, it's the first of its kind for a state to partner with the federal government. And what this entails is specifically Border Patrol. It's a federal agency. When people are encountered during traffic stops with certain state troopers, those individuals would be asked about their immigration status. And if they're determined there to be an illegal immigrant, they'll be brought to a Border Patrol station or an ICE facility. Now, the folks who are brought to a Border Patrol station, since Florida is a border state and has those, will now be given an opportunity to voluntarily depart from the United States. People brought to ICE stations will not have that opportunity. They hope to expand it that far. But for the people brought to the Border Patrol station, just, an hour or two after being pulled over for a traffic stop, they'll be asked, would you like to self-deport? The state of Florida will pay for your flight back home and will take you to the airport. And then, the rest is on you. But it's the first time that a state is funding this. And we're not talking, big money. These are flights that they're showing me under $100 to get to, say, Fort Lauderdale to Guatemala City tomorrow. So really, interesting operation going on there.
And is this option to self-deport only given to non-criminal immigrants?
Yeah, at this point, the program is only for non-criminal immigrants because those who are criminals might be facing other proceedings. They also might need to go through immigrant court proceedings, which is what many immigrants, typically someone taken into custody, is going to be sent to an ICE detention facility. Criminals are being sent to Alligator Alcatraz, as it's known, the state-run detention facility in the Everglades. And people there in that position also at Alligator Alcatraz are typically fighting deportation and in those proceedings. And the state is doing this in an effort to sort of deal with the pipeline of people that they're arresting in these traffic stops, since those numbers are really starting to add up.
So what happens if they don't choose to self-deport?
For immigrants who choose not to self-deport, they'll be placed in immigrant removal proceedings, which means they need to go before an immigration judge and make their case. And typically people who are released at the border, who crossed illegally under the Biden administration, are going to be in court 3 to 10 years from the time they're released. And so instead they're being released, or not released, but placed into detention where they'll wait probably several months to appear before an immigration court, much faster than if they were just out living in the country waiting for court one day. And they'll have a judge decide whether they're going to be deported or whether they'll be released into the country. Most of them in that situation will be deported. So this is a way for people who have not self-deported through the government's instructions to say, hey, I'd rather be in control of myself and my future and deporting today how I choose, rather than being detained for months on end at an ICE facility that might be across the country for my family and then end up getting deported anyway.
Yeah, and this, like you said, is a pretty unprecedented program that, for those who want to learn more about it, you write about extensively in your Washington Examiner article. Can you talk a little bit more about what you witnessed on the ground? And from what you've learned and witnessed, do you think that this is an effective program?
Yeah, the Washington Examiner got to explore Alligator Alcatraz as it was opening and also be out with Florida Highway Patrol as they were now carrying out some immigration effort to help the federal government. They're starting to see early numbers indicate it's successful. The state was telling me that they want to roll this out to immigrants who are apprehended and taken to an ICE facility. So when I say ICE facility in that sense, it's the first stop where they'll be sort of processed and then determined if they're going to a real detention facility. But yeah, they've been offering this as well at Alligator Alcatraz. The issue is that most people there are criminal background or they're already in deportation proceedings and they're fighting it. So they're not going to want to, self-deport tomorrow. But I think the state sees this. Certainly Florida is leading the way on all immigration enforcement alongside the Trump administration and sees this as a new pilot program that other states could get behind.
Yeah, and I'd love to ask you more about that in a second, what you think future involvement could look like. But are there any major criticisms of this program so far? I know it's not very well known. A lot of people may not even know this is happening. I didn't before I read your article, but have you heard anything, any major criticisms?
The DeSantis administration has yet to announce the program. They've really kept it close to their chests, and our report was the first to expose that it's going on now. I spoke with an immigration lawyer, Aaron Reichlin-Melnick, in Washington, D.C., and he shared concerns that immigrants don't have a chance to consult with lawyers when they're going through this process. It might be very quick, an hour or two to make a very significant decision. They might not be aware of ways to avoid deportation if they had a lawyer to help them. And so those were his concerns. But he said looking at the legal grounds for this, the person is not in federal custody. At that point, they're choosing to self-deport, leave the country on their own accord. And so he was saying there's not great legal grounds to challenge what the state is doing. This seems like a well put together program in that sense, as far as its legal establishment.
And you mentioned that we could see this program expanding into other states. So if we do see that, do you think that federal funds will be involved at some point?
I do think we could definitely see federal funding supporting this. The state, Florida, is hoping to get reimbursed by the federal government, but right now they're spending their own money on this. The cost is significantly cheaper to pay $100, take someone to the airport for them to fly home than to detain them months and months at a state-funded facility like Alligator Alcatraz or a federal ICE facility and then have to pay for their deportation by ICE. And so they're looking at this from a budgetary perspective, and for them, it literally makes all the sense.
Well, and I just want to get your thoughts too. Is there anything else that you think is important for people to understand, either about this specific program or just the current status of immigration efforts in the country?
Yeah, I've been doing so many interviews the last 24 hours. One of the things is sort of as I'm talking through it, I'm realizing, under the Biden administration, Texas led out of all the red states. It was the one leading the charge against the Biden administration as this border crisis unfolded for several years. Now that the Trump administration has come in, they've pivoted to no longer focusing on the borders because the border is secure now. They're focusing on the interior of the country. And so it's a very different, defensive versus offensive sort of thing. And Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida has stepped up like I'm doing stories. I've done several in the last few weeks, a new way that Florida is stepping up to match the federal efforts. He's really shown to be an ally to President Trump, considering that a few years ago, they were in the election fighting against each other. But he's really coming up with new ideas of his own. And I think Florida is really the one to watch while Trump is in office, carrying out this deportation operation.
All right, Madison, appreciate that story there. And that's going to leave us with time on the podcast today for one last thing.
1 Corinthians 10:13, God is faithful and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, he will also provide a way of escape that you may be able to endure it. And you think about Ben Fuller's story and really all of our stories, there's always a way out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, God's going to provide the assistance we need. He's never going to tell you to do anything that he won't equip you and help you with on the way through it. So great reminder there from 1 Corinthians. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Quick Start Podcast. As always, make sure you're getting on over to cbnnews.com and faithwire.com. And make sure you're checking out our all-new FaithWire Substack. It's faithwire.substack.com. We appreciate that. Lord willing, and that creek don't rise. We'll be back tomorrow with more. God bless. We'll see you then.